Welcome, and thanks so much for attending today's presentation, Teaching Environmental Health with Purpose and Action. My name is David Diadana, and I'm the Senior Editor responsible for the Public Health program at Springer Publishing, an independent publisher known for innovative textbooks, professional references, and clinical products in the fields of nursing, behavioral and health sciences, and medicine. Before I introduce the presenters, please note that this webinar will be recorded, disseminated, and posted on our website in case you miss any part of today's presentation. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box on your Zoom control panel, and we can address those at the end during the Q&A session. And if you forget to ask a question, there will be a brief survey sent at the end of the webinar, and you can include your question there. We greatly appreciate all your questions and feedback. And I'm delighted to introduce the presenters today. Dr. Natasha DeJarnett is an assistant professor in the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute at the University of Louisville Division of Environmental Medicine. She recently served as a deputy director in the White House's Council on Environmental Quality. Dr. Natalie Sampson is an associate professor at the University of Michigan Dearborn, and she is the immediate past chair of the environmental section of the American Public Health Association. And Dr. Lindsay Talon is an associate professor of public health and assistant director of the MPH program at the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. So I'm delighted to hand over the presentation to this great panel and to Natalie.
Thanks, David. So to get us started, we thought we'd figure out who was in the room with us. And for those of you recording or watching the recording later, we'll try to pull out some of the themes and hopefully the discussion will be relevant to you too. So if folks don't mind, just mentioning who you are, where you're calling in from, and specifically who you teach. Obviously, that's a complicated question, but is it undergrads? Is it grad students? Is it returning students? Is it continuing ed? Let us know who's with us today. There we go. We got some folks calling in from Florida. Great to have you. UC Davis, some undergrad, some grad, Utah, all over the country. This is great. And as you heard, Lindsay has been teaching on the East Coast. I'm in the Midwest, and Natasha's been virtually teaching with George Washington University and others. And so we are representative here. Purdue, Mercy, Pennsylvania, great. Keep it coming. We'll share with you what we're hoping to accomplish today together. So if you signed up for the webinar, you may have had a sense of what we were trying to do, but really wanted to pause and just talk about how and why we teach environmental health, what this looks like, what voices we try to make sure are represented in our classrooms, talk about some of the tools and activities and assignments that have been useful for us to really support students in coming to this work with passion, with purpose, and how we try to empower them to go off and use this, whether that be personally, professionally in their work. But we didn't want to ignore the fact that we're in a very special moment. And so we wanted to leave some time to also discuss, what does teaching this topic look like in this specific moment in time? And we've got some people calling in globally as well. Welcome to our Australian friend on the call. So fantastic. Hoping you'll engage in the chat with us as we go forward and talk about these different learning outcomes. All right. So one more chat question at this point for you. We're going to ask you to also put in what is one goal you have when teaching environmental health. So think on that. And we'll share what that looks like for us as well. Can be a short phrase. And I'll just get us started and let you all write in the chat as you're thinking about it. So I teach undergrads mostly. Most of them are going into public health, social work, healthcare. And for me, my goal is really to make sure that they understand why science is so important, but also making sure that they understand social science as part of that. So for me, that is translating what environmental health looks like in the real world, and dealing with some of those really daunting topics that can be overwhelming for undergrads. That's climate change, environmental racism, trying to understand exposures that they're experiencing in their daily lives. My goal is really to help them feel equipped to talk about these things from a scientific perspective and a personal perspective. Natasha, do you want to share a little bit about what your goal is when teaching environmental health?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity to share. I am a session lead for the Environmental and Biological Foundations in Public Health course for Master of Public Health students. And this is really the students' intro into environmental health. So some of my students will select environmental health as their concentration, and some will not. But ultimately, I just want to support the next generation of public health leaders to be knowledgeable in the role of environmental health in determining the health and well-being of their communities. I'll pass it to Lindsay.
Those are really great responses. I feel like mine is holistic in a way. Students come into class and they're just so excited about environmental health, and I really want to capture that passion and I want to build upon that passion so that they can make a difference in the world around them. Because I feel like that's what they want to do. A lot of my students are graduate students and they're health professions, and I really feel like they all need to know about environmental health. And so I want to make sure that they know about it and that they can share it with their family members and their communities.
Thanks, Lindsay. I won't summarize what folks have contributed, but if you all want to do that in your own time thinking about that, I know personally I sometimes have to pause and think about, you know, the why am I doing this? You can get caught up in the grading, you can get caught up in designing the syllabi, but really stepping back and saying, what is my goal for teaching this class? And so just wanted to start there and ping you all to think about that too. um, so one of the other things we wanted to talk about was how we value and how we bring diverse perspectives into our classrooms. So again, I would love to see a few thoughts on this. What is something, maybe it's something practical and simple you do. Maybe you're working on it and you're not doing that great of a job, and that's okay too. We're all always trying to improve our teaching. But Lindsay and Natasha and I really have spent some time together thinking about, what does this look like for us in our classrooms, whether that's an asynchronous class, an in-person class, and personally, as someone who does participatory research, so I do a lot of work with community partners who hold me accountable to recognizing different types of data, different types of information, qualitative, quantitative, peer-reviewed articles, gray literature, spoken word, multimedia in the classroom. And so for me, it's really about making sure those voices are showing up in my class. And I hope that some of you are thinking about this in different ways as well. So I'm going to see if Natasha or Lindsay want to jump in and share about how they really value these diverse perspectives when they're teaching.
Oh, sure. And love this question and love the opportunity to share around it. For me, through my work experiences outside of academia, this led me to be trained in a way that I view everything through a lens of health equity. So I ask questions and challenge students along these lines. And in addition, I work to impart the need for meaningful community engagement and community driven research, which encourages students to really be in a posture of welcoming diverse perspectives to better inform environmental health challenges. I'll pass it to Lindsay.
Wow. I really think about encouraging diverse perspectives in the classroom from the very beginning of building my course and being intentional and how I design the syllabus, the reading materials, like you were talking about, Natalie, um, the other media that I introduce in courses when I teach online. So I want to make sure that I have a variety of perspectives for students to learn from, but I also want to make sure that they feel comfortable in the classroom, again, whether that's online or in person, bringing forward their perspectives. So we do everything from norm setting to, you know, adding guidelines for discussions, encouraging different perspectives in those discussions, because we really want to hear from everyone in the classroom.
Thanks for sharing that, Lindsay. Obviously, at the end of this, we'll get to sharing more about the book that we put together that, we welcome all of you to use. But we wanted to show off this slide because these are the co-authors of the textbook we put together. And whether or not you're using our book, we are just so honored and proud that we are able to bring all of these voices into our classrooms. And so you'll see here, you might recognize some faces if you're in the field or you've been in the field a while, but we've got represented here community organizers, environmental lawyers, environmental scientists, thought leaders, physicians, reps from different agencies. So those first two images are my friends from Dearborn, Michigan, Ali Abazid and Samir Deshpande, who are sort of rethinking what local public health can do when it comes to environmental health. You'll see a lot of faces in here are organizers. So those who've been in the field might recognize Omega Wilson, Wilma Subra, John Doyle, Vernice Miller-Travis, Beto Lugo Martinez, many others, but those are folks who've been working on these issues on the front lines. And so, you know, I was polling a lot of videos and writings and recordings from these folks all along. And so to have it all in one place now, I have my students reading interviews from some of these folks, case studies about the work that they're doing, and really capturing what this looks like in different places and throughout history. And so we're just really excited about having all those voices together in one place and hope that you would be too. So beautiful picture there. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to my colleagues here to talk about some of the ways we try to support our students in applying some of these lessons about environmental health in our classes.
Wonderful, thank you. So, in real life, students are constantly thinking about, even if they don't say it, what does this look like in real life? So this feature throughout the book, in each chapter, helps students to explore concepts that they learn in the chapter in real life and in the field. Next slide, please. We have a chat question for you and would love you to answer this question in the chat. How do we connect these concepts in the real world? And so as you're thinking through how you'd like to respond to that, I'd love to open it up to my colleagues to share how they connect these concepts in the real world in their classrooms. I'll share as well, and I'll be happy to highlight anything that's in the chat also. Natalie, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of times my undergrad students sort of come to my class and are like, well, this is all beyond my control. There's nothing I can do. Right. And so I really like to dig in with them and look at, well, what does this look like in practice in your own community? And so we spend a lot of time looking at budgets, looking at, you know, who's doing what in their community and sometimes going off and talking to said people who are making some of these decisions. What does advocacy look like? What does it look like to protect yourself from some exposures that might be happening in your community? So for me, it's really trying to make it very real and meet them where they're at. Yeah, I'll send it over to Lindsay.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I love what's in the chat talking about case studies. I definitely use a ton of case studies because I feel like that's what students can relate to. It's a real world example, and it connects the more scientific concepts perhaps to the real world. And in addition to that, students really bring a lot of the experience, their lived experience to the classroom. And so I always want to recognize that. So they can share stories. A lot of my students are health professionals, share stories about their experience in healthcare, maybe in different countries. And we really learn from those experiences as well. I'll pass it
Wonderful.
to Natasha.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate the examples that you've shared. And there's some good examples in the chat as well. Case studies were mentioned, assessments of products they use, maybe life cycle assessments, the basics of environmental health, talking about facilities, drinking water treatment plants, sewage treatment plants, landfills. So many experiences for students that are really connected to these concepts in the real world. A semester-long project to find an environmental hazard in their surrounding environment. Please keep the ideas coming in the chat. This is an exciting conversation. And I'll share with you a couple examples. But for me, myself, I intentionally started teaching after I had gained some experiences in research and after I had some roles in supporting the public health workforce and the environmental health workforce. And this helped me to have a better understanding of what students might expect in the workforce. and how the knowledge and the skills that they're gaining now might be applicable. So I have many stories that I have accumulated over the years, and love sharing my many stories to allow them to have a real world application of what they might see when they enter the field. And it also helps open their eyes to what we encounter in the environments all around us. And so we have some really great examples here in the book. If we go forward to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more. Again, please feel free to keep the examples coming in the chat as well. So in our course, we work to help students to see that environmental health is experienced locally, that it's all around them. I'm pretty sure I say it 20 times the term environmental health is inherently local. And it's also exciting and helpful to point out to the students that environmental health is the second highest populated sector within the public health field. And that is because every health department needs environmental health services, whether it's restaurant inspections or ensuring clean air to breathe. We're very well represented in the field. And it further brings home the point to the students that environmental health is inherently local. So our textbook includes these in real life features that help students to connect what they're learning and exploring in environmental health within our daily lives. And the example on the screen is spot on with an activity that I had on the job that I often use as an example to my students. So, in my experience, we looked at all the state health departments across the US. We looked at all their websites and took inventory of the children's environmental health services that were discussed on their website. And it really helped to show the gaps, the opportunities, and some positive examples for other states to consider. So the example on the screen gives students a similar opportunity to identify environmental health data that's currently available on the city, on the county, or the regional websites. Understanding that funding can be different across different states or localities. Um, and also that some states and agencies have programs that, for example, may address climate change and some do not. And some local health departments have programs that test radon in homes and some do not. So this gives students the opportunity to understand those differences. So activities like this are immediately beneficial to them because they can become more familiar with the availability or unavailability of this data. They also learn how to find it, but it can also challenge them to identify the gaps, the needs, and the opportunities right there within their community. And that can be quite inspirational for them. Next slide, please. So in the course that I teach, our students complete a carbon footprint activity during the live session, and they discuss what they could easily change in their carbon footprint, what would be difficult to change, and what would require policy to support change. And in the book, we have a wonderful example of Fatima and her daily exposures, who during her class experience takes an inventory of her daily routine and learns that her daily activities leave her exposed to a number of environmental pollutants through different pathways. She finds environmental exposures are everywhere in her daily routine. Um, and this provides a few opportunities for students to think around. They can think of the low hanging fruit, the things that they're able to change on their own. They can think, this can also promote some systems thinking. They can examine what challenges exist, what are the barriers to addressing those challenges, and what else could be affected or required for due to these changes. And then it can also challenge students to consider what requires a policy intervention or community change. Uh, Next slide, please. So we have this great opportunity to expose our students to the latest information on critical community values like access to clean water. But we can also equip them to interpret the information specific to their communities. So in this final in real life example, students are challenged to explore their community's drinking water quality report. And it offers challenges for them to identify the exposures, to note anything surprising that they find in the report, report and really take stock and critically assess the report to even offer recommendations on what would make this type of information more useful. Now, I will note there's some flexibility that's needed in this activity if a student's household relies on well rather than a municipal water source. Um, they may not be able to find that information in the same manner. So, in this case, we may suggest that students choose a nearby community of choice to complete this in real life example. And I will hand it off to Lindsay to continue our conversation.
Thanks, Natasha. So, as I mentioned before, I really love how students bring so much passion to the classroom. I feel like they take environmental health because they care about social justice, environmental justice, but they often don't know how to take action. So, one of our roles as educators is to teach them how to actually make a difference in the world around them and to become change makers. So, our first question for you in the chat is, how do you personally help students to take on environmental health issues, either professionally or personally, in the careers that they're going to have in their everyday lives? And while I give everybody a minute to think about that question and respond in the chat, maybe I'll pass it over to Natalie to share an example, and then I'll share one as well, and Natasha can too.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I mean, I've been teaching environmental health to undergrads now for, I don't know, maybe 15 years. And I realized at some point that I was just overwhelming them and mentally. This is a lot of information to take in emotionally. And so I really tried more regularly to offer solutions, to offer whether that be something that they can do at home to reduce their exposures to something, or whether that can be, a big advocacy step they want to take. And so, what's really great about so many of us in that are in these classrooms is we are engaged in these issues ourselves. So for me, it's a lot of posting what's going on. Not everything can fit into the classroom setting, but it's, here's a webinar, here's an event, here's a, new data set, a new news article. I saw some of you in the chat talking about really keeping it grounded in current events, and that's really important to me. And I actually have a time is now assignment. I always have that at the end of the semester, they have to just do something, anything. And so there's a reflective piece to that, but it's really, again, sort of where they're at. And for some students, that's like getting out there. They want to be active and protest and do direct action work. One student, one time I had wanted to make a worm bin because they were really passionate about learning about food waste and the implications of that. And so for me, it's been kind of having some fun assignment at the end that's really active. I'll see what Natasha does in her classrooms.
Oh, thanks. So we have them to assess environmental health issues through the experiences of different stakeholders, maybe even debate those, and also even changing positions. So assigning them a position and then having them also explore that from the other side, allowing them to discuss these as a group. And identify what's needed from these different stakeholder perspectives and what can be done individually versus through policy. So it helps them to see what they can do, what's simple and what is feasible and what isn't. Just like you said, Natalie, I have to be very careful when it comes to overwhelming them. I am very motivated by data and I am very comfortable with saying this causes this and this causes that. And this has this adverse health outcome and this has that adverse health outcome, but that can be overwhelming. I teach virtually, and so I have to be very in tune to their body language on camera. And I can see when I am overwhelming them, like think of our climate conversations and eco grief. So I also when I know this will happen or when I know it's likely to happen or when I see it's happening on screen, I also encourage them to think of groups that they could be a part of, even outside of the classroom, that can be helpful to tackling the issues that are much larger than themselves, but are much more feasible when you're working with a group of like-minded people or a large group of like-minded people that are working to working to address that same challenge. Thanks.
Those are such great points. And we have some other good points in the chat, but I'll share first before I go into those. I also teach emergency preparedness. So that concept of, people being overwhelmed and giving them something to do is something I recognized likewise in environmental health. So I feel like the time is now, or any activities that you do in your classroom, give students a way to engage and have an outlet for maybe some of their anxiety. It gives them something to do, which is really great. And they seem to really latch on to that. And I think part of designing the assignments is giving them a lot of choice so that they can um, pick different issues that they want to address, different risks in their environment, maybe a community that they want to work with, that they're passionate about, and that really gets them engaged in the assignments. Some other things that we had in the chat are talking about spreading awareness for lead and other toxic chemicals. So, maybe once they're learning on these other websites that we've talked about different contaminants and maybe looking at their home communities, they can actually spread that awareness to their immediate family members and also their communities. And then doing some statistics and showing the power of data, whether you're displaying the data in a relevant way for community members and really getting that point across and how they can use that also for research as well as policy and action is an important part of what we teach them in class. I think current events are also a great, way to engage, and we talked about that as well. They can see success stories maybe from current events of other activists in their communities. We like to watch, some documentaries here and there in class. One that was really popular last semester was Toxic Beauty, and then also this Toxic Town short mini series that just came out on Netflix has also been really popular. So just looking at current media and trying to engage students through that is important as well. So thanks for the ideas. Let's move on to the next slide. So another important thing, since I work with a lot of health professionals, but I really think it's important for all students, is recognizing that health professionals are key messengers in the relaying the risks about climate change as well as environmental health conversations. So one of the activities that we like to do is try to encourage students to talk to their primary care providers about climate and health. And it's a small way, but an impactful way to raise awareness. So they can do this through sharing resources from organizations that offer climate and health education for medical professionals. Some of those examples are Healthcare Without Harm, Medical Students for a Sustainable Future, Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education. And there's a lot of great resources that are out there. So this can really talk to our students because they may be working in health professional fields in the future. But any job in environmental health is impacting health. So they really need to think about how they can talk to community leaders that can help spread the message. And this is one great activity for that. Next slide. Another good thing that is a resource that students can use is it comes from the American Public Health Association, APHA's Children's Environmental Health Committee. And I've been working with that committee for a number of years. And one thing that we've developed in that group is the Climate and Health Education Toolkit. And this is designed for students to take this information and actually go out and teach it. So one of the best ways to learn is also to teach. So students can take this toolkit and they can go out and teach grades 9 through 12, but it really can be adapted. I've adapted it for my own children's schools that are younger in elementary and middle school. And they can take this toolkit and get involved, volunteer to teach, and really spread the message of environmental health to the younger generation so that they can be passionate and we can eventually have them in our classroom too. So students can access this toolkit, or anybody can, and you can spread the word to your students. It's on the APHA website. And next slide. So I think that one of the important things to talk about in every conversation right now in public health is how can we really adapt what we're doing in our education to meet the moment? So we have a few ideas for that as well. And I'll hand it over to Natasha.
Awesome, thank you. Indeed, can we meet this moment? And yes, we are in this moment, and what an interesting moment that we are in. We are in very interesting times, and as heavy as much as that is happening around us, maybe weighing on the mind of professors, our students are feeling it as well. They are likely thinking about entering a field. Where there is rapidly changing policies. This is a rapidly changing policy landscape, particularly for environmental policy. So we can consider especially the policies that address conditions that promote health disparities. Our textbook describes executive orders that are relevant to environmental justice. Executive Order 12898 on federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. This executive order required that federal agencies incorporate environmental justice into each agency's mission, or I should say, it encouraged federal agencies to incorporate environmental justice into each agency's mission. There's Executive Order 14008 on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. That brought us the Justice 40 initiative, which set the goal that 40% of the benefits of certain federal investments would reach disadvantaged communities. And then there's Executive Order 14096 on revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. It provides a whole of government definition on environmental justice strategic plan requirements for federal agencies, and the direction of a research plan for environmental justice science, data, and research for the federal government or federal agencies. And so um, the book our textbook provides an interesting opportunity to understand the role of federal policy, and the time that we are in right now offers a really interesting opportunity to explore this in real time. What can be gained and what can be lost, and that relation to health. So this is a really interesting time to meet this moment. And then this can also provide an opportunity, this timing, I should say, can also provide an opportunity to challenge students to examine local and state policies in addition to what is happening at the federal and executive levels. We're also in an interesting time where data and tools are disappearing. We promote data-driven and evidence-based solutions, yet the tools on data and environmental justice are disappearing. Probably this time last year, there were around 7 different environmental justice tools that were available from the federal government. And in fact, there are examples of these tools in our book, including an example about the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool and EPA's EJ Screen, and others that are no longer hosted by our government websites and subsequently not being maintained by our government. These tools are helpful in classroom settings to help students to visualize the burdens to communities and understand the tools that can be used to inform decision making. And it's not just tools that's missing, it's also data as well. But perhaps there's a great opportunity here as well to help students to know where the data is currently housed, to host hackathons for data with students, and to also challenge the need for quantitative data and lived experience to be weighed equally with that of qualitative data. I think I said that backwards. Want qualitative data and lived expertise to be weighed equally with that of quantitative data. In chapter 2 of our book, we discuss misinformation and disinformation, provide a definition for these. And this is something that our students can be challenged with. And it's initially in the course, probably the first time the student submits a research paper. This can easily be a topic that comes up then, and it definitely comes up in our course, where students write their research paper and understanding the citations of their paper and being able to weigh and value those critically. So challenging our students to be inquisitive and to think critically, particularly when they're seeking credible information. Um, Challenging misinformation and disinformation is discussed in the book, along with some other, in other words, tools for future environmental health practitioners to use. And then we can also lead students to trusted, reputable messengers. Um, Lindsay mentioned the American Public Health Association before, and the American Public Health Association provides information, is providing, as we speak, information about the current threats to health in this challenging policy landscape and what we can do. And so we can also point students in that direction as well, to trusted messengers with reliable information as well. I will pass it back to Natalie.
Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, and I think also just being honest with ourselves that we're trying to figure this out too, as researchers or as faculty or as folks who are teaching, one class but doing the work on the ground. We're all navigating it. So I think to this next topic that relates of meeting the moment is there's a lot of difficult conversations. I know there are in my classroom, there always have been, but specifically now of how do we talk about some of these things with our students and um, again, where are they at in navigating these things that are happening? And so hopefully all of you, some of you have access to, I know on our campus, we rely heavily on our Center for Learning and Teaching and our Hub for Teaching on our Ann Arbor and Dearborn campuses that spend a lot of time, I think, talking about just pedagogy in general. But I think the three of us have had a lot of conversations about, okay, well, what does that look like around environmental health and justice issues specifically? And so trying to take those tools into our classrooms and thinking about something we've talked about many times already is just using that data to start the conversation or using the current event to start the conversation and saying, matter of fact, this is what's happening. These are the patterns we're seeing. For me in Southeast Michigan, there's no denying the data that we are in non-attainment for particulate matter and ozone. That is just a fact. And so how do we talk about why and what that looks like? And sometimes that can lead to difficult conversations, but really starting from that point has been helpful for me. I know we're also in a moment of our students sort of navigating what does it mean to be learning online or learning in person, or my middle school or high school journey looks very different. And now you want me to come into the classroom and have these really hard conversations in person sometimes. And so um, going back to what we talked about earlier in recognizing those diverse voices and listening to different folks, I spend a lot of time in my classes trying to just humanize these issues. And I think, again, not to go back to the book and why we love it, but I think that we really did try to hear those voices and recognize, that this is real people and these are real communities and these are real issues that people are dealing with. And so when we have those diverse voices, I think that the students feel that their community might be represented or the things that they're dealing with might be represented. And so a lot of that for me looks like getting students to talk to each other. And I know not everybody is an extrovert, but there's so many ways we can do this. I will have students sometimes just turn to someone new for 60 seconds and tell them how their day is going before we jump into the content for the day. And so just recognizing that, oh, these are real people with real feelings before we get into these conversations around issues of inequity or environmental justice, for instance, and what that looks like. And again, I think going back to recognizing the solutions and supporting students who want to run and do bigger things with this information, it all can't happen in the classroom. And so I will say when I put up current events, I consistently try to say, okay, that's like 4 really bad news articles. I'm going to make sure there's something also that is about a solution or something happening that's really cool in your community so that you can talk through some of this with real people again. And I will say a lot of times some of these difficult conversations go beyond the classroom. For me, I've led our public health student org for the last 10 years and students who want more and we can't always pull that off in our 60 minutes or 75 minutes together. A lot of times we can do that in other spaces on campus. And so just, always happy to think through pedagogy with folks. I think we could have a whole network of people who are teaching environmental health right now, talking about, how to meet the moment in these different ways. And so with that, trying to address the elephant in the room, I'll pass it to Lindsay to talk a little bit more about what this can look like as a culture of care.
So I left this simple on the slide. Acknowledging the emotional landscape is really something that's important in this environment, both from the broader world and what's going on to what students are experiencing. Mental health is also environmental health, whether we're looking at how the environment has an impact on our mental health, the green space, the physical activity opportunities that people have available to them, down to the personal level. So I think that it's important when you're talking to your students or responding to them if you're teaching online to really express that you are there for them personally. You can also refer them to any resources. So understanding what those are available at your university and recognizing that although you're very supportive, you may not be, the counselor they need in the moment for a particular issue, and understanding how to refer them if needed is an important part of it. Um, I also do in my online classes a self-reflection, and I think that that helps me understand what students are doing. So I start the semester with them setting personal goals, and I ask them to share anything that they may be struggling with, or something good that they may be working on, like trying to pass a board exam, and that helps me understand what their perspective is, what they want to learn, but also what they may be experiencing in their day-to-day life. So I think that that helps me acknowledge their emotional landscape and develop some of the learning opportunities that we have in class around that. The self-reflections are also part of my ungrading policy in my environmental health class. And I came to that after watching a Council on Education and Public Health, or CEEF, webinar about anti-oppressive teaching methods. And I was so excited about it that I threw out all my grading, in the next semester. And it's gone really well. Personally, I feel like I get to know students better, even if I'm teaching them online. And I also feel like I'm less punitive. They're giving themselves grades. I'm either agreeing with that or not agreeing with it. And it takes into account where they are coming from. So I really feel like it sets a culture of care in the classroom, and it says that it's more about their own learning journey, which makes them more engaged in the work. But it also means that I'm listening to them and hearing their stories. That's an important part. And then I think teaching our students that they can make a difference, which I keep talking about in all of these slides, but that helps them feel like they're doing something and feel like they're caring for others, even if the broader environment may feel daunting, and their work environment may be challenging. And then reinforcing the fact that caring for themselves is also collective care. And we have to think about that as educators as well. This is challenging for us. So we really have to be able to support each other. And like Natalie was saying, maybe you come together with colleagues and you discuss some of these issues that are going on and how we can better support students in this environment. Thanks. Next slide.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Natalie. It's the Q&A session. So if you haven't typed in a question for the presenters, please do so now. And I could probably start off the bat because I had a question and it's related to the book, but we talked about using current events and so forth in the classroom. Can you talk about the podcast that your students and colleagues put together and how that can support, I guess, some of the teaching and learning, in the classroom?
Yeah, I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, I love podcasts. So I think we were all really excited about doing this. And we had two students working with us that have great experience in developing podcasts and also enjoy listening to them. So they really took the ball and went running with it to develop these podcasts. And we focused it on PFAS, which is a topic that I'm passionate about. I work with the PFAS Project Lab and do analysis of different governance issues and PFAS stories and the toxicology of it. And I just think that it was a nice way to tell the story of different sides of an issue that's very current right now. So in the podcast series, you hear about the science as well as hearing about activists that have been affected by PFAS contamination and how that's personally changed their life. And then it's another multimedia way to reach students. So you've got the book, you've got the resources that you're giving them, the activities, and then something that they could listen to maybe while they're commuting to class. So it's really nice to have that option. Anything else you guys want to say, Natalie or Natasha?
Thank you. Here's a question. So what, if there are any strategies or teaching methods you recommend for simplifying, kind of complex concepts? I think you kind of touched on this a little, but if you could maybe talk about, especially with different types of cohorts of students, potentially.
Yeah, I can jump in, but others join me. We do think and talk about this a lot in the book, but just in general, a lot of my research actually is around this idea of plain language, of how do we make sure that folks can not just find information, but access it in a variety of ways. Is it, just the word choice, but also is it, appropriate in a way that groups of people, agencies, communities, populations can navigate it? And then is it actionable? Like, do they know what the next step is to do with that information? And so we really spend a lot of time in the book thinking about how to do that and how to talk about it. But I also bake that into my class with my students. So currently in my class, they're working on story map projects. So trying to tell the story of a specific case study. That could be one that they read about in the class. It can be something in their own community. Some of them I've partnered with community orgs who want a website that sort of maps out and spatially shows some of these issues, but I put them to task on how do they communicate in plain language for the audience that they're working with. And so sharing a lot of information about what that looks like, in the voice that you're using and the way that you're telling somebody else's story, maybe, and making sure that at the end of the day, people, again, have something actionable, whether it's information or additional resources. And so it is tricky because students, even knowing I teach undergrad, doesn't mean I'm just teaching all the same student, right? Because they're all coming to this with a different level of understanding and personal experience. And environmental health is so relatable to all of our lives that we're all, this is part of who we are in our day to day. We're talking about our built environment, our natural environment, our social environment. And so pretty quickly, students can grasp those concepts. But then, how do we break down uncertainty and what it means to prove something when it comes to science, which is so central to the work we do in public health? And so I'm just really transparent and talk about the lack of plain language that happens in our society and the jargon that's used in academia, and how do we break that down in ways that different groups of people can actually use this for their own community or their own health. So that's how I navigate it. But Lindsay or Natasha, do you want to add anything?
Thanks, Natalie. I have another question. Um, in this moment, careers in public health, environmental health, they're kind of evolving. So you might have students that were planning governmental public health roles in their future or other things. How are you kind of handling that conversation? And as an instructor and as someone who's has leadership roles in this area, is that something that you're beginning to discuss with people or students?
Like, I think we all have some thoughts on this. I don't know, Natasha, if you wanted to jump in. I couldn't tell if you were unmuting.
Yeah, I'm thinking through this and being very transparent. I'm learning through this. I have just come off of 2 years of leave from the university and returned back from service to the government or service to the American people. And so it will be very interesting once I do re-enter the classroom officially and feel the weight of the students in terms of their decision making as they go forward. Um, what I will say, I would lean to myself somewhat. At the time that I finished the Master of Public Health program, was the start of a recession. So that was a unusual time to be finishing then as well. This time is unique. It's ripe with challenges, but I think that we are well equipped to identify the opportunities that exist within it. As I pointed out before, where there seems to be disappearing data, there are opportunities for students to actually help and support to find and rehouse data. And in that can learn what some of the gaps are and what their purpose may be in place. Um, there are opportunities within the government may still exist. Time will tell on that, but they'll also have opportunities in nonprofits. They'll have opportunities in academia. And so this may challenge them to think differently about what their initial contribution will be to the field, but everything continues to change and continues to mold, should I say. And hopefully we are building or informing health professionals that will be ready to adjust with changes as needed, because this won't be the only strange set of circumstances that we encounter in this field. It's not the first time and it won't be the last, but hopefully we're building opportunities for our students to amass their creativity and look for ways that they can use that as they go forward in changing the field of health, changing the field of public health, changing the field of environmental health in positive ways.
Thanks, Natasha. There was a question in the chat about the EJ screener. Is there an alternative?
I
Um,
have thoughts on this. So there are a number of groups that have come together to rehouse this information. So EJ Screen is available. It's not currently being hosted by the federal government or updated by the federal government. EJ Screen is available. The Environmental Justice Index from Health and Human Services is available, and the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool is available. My best recommendation to you, where you can find all of these most easily, is to go to screening-tools.com, and that will allow you to see where they have been rehoused by the public and environmental public environmental data partners have housed them there. So appreciate that question, Kevin, and definitely welcome Lindsay or Natalie to add more meat to those bones.
I knew you'd have a good answer for Kevin on the mapping stuff. Kevin, we have a pretty amazing EJ screen version for Michigan. I don't know which state you're into, but if it's just for the assignment, again, it's nice to do it when it's locally relevant to your students. But I know Natasha's been working hard to make sure that folks know about all these resources. So, and I'll just add, I think that, wherever you can send students to find a community, whether that's for some people, it's the American Public Health Association. I know there's organizations like Public Health Awakened and Health Impact Partners, and I'm sure there's others globally. I think that there's a lot of people having these conversations and trying to figure out how to support each other within the field right now. And so, yeah, I mean, not that you can't have those classroom discussions or office hour discussions, but I think that there's a lot of people trying to make sense of it too. So happy to continue this conversation with any of you, honestly, and figuring out how to support my students. I know also a lot of my students aren't necessarily going directly into environmental health per se, but we spend a lot of time talking about, for you, how do you address these issues in your career path? We talk about climate change is going to impact us all if it isn't already. And so what does that look like if you are going to be a physician or a social worker or if you want public health and you want environmental health, how do we get you there? And how do we, like Natasha said, I think helping students kind of try out different ways to do the work. But yeah, I don't know if any of us have any perfect answers for this question as we're trying to figure it out ourselves, David.
Well, thank you. I think we're almost at time. So do you want to send it to the next page? And so this is the textbook that these lovely presenters put together with a huge amount of contributions from other people, as you saw on one of those slides. And it's a very nice new book, first edition. If you would like to request a desk copy, you can do so through the website. The QR code here also with a discount code. But we invite feedback, even if you aren't going to use it or if you will use it. Please send us that feedback. There will be a survey after this webinar, but also feel free to reach out to us about what we can do better. And we're always thinking about a new edition in the future too. So what will environmental health look like down the road? We'll be working on that as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and please have a good rest of your week and take care. Thanks again, everyone.